Hi guys, welcome back. This video is going to show you how to make loaf bread in a solar oven. Oh my gosh, it works so well. I'm so excited to share this information with you. So just a little information. This is my first attempt at making bread in my solar oven, and it was a huge success, so I wanted to share it with you. But there are 3 things that you need to think about. I researched this, and a lot of people gave these 3 recommendations. If you're going to make yeast bread in a solar oven, think about this. Number 1, whatever liquid you normally add to your bread recipe, you're going to want to cut back on it. So either try halving it and see how that does. If you need to add a little more, like a lot of places said that what you want to do in lieu of adding water or milk, whatever the measurement is for your water or milk, what you want to do is first add your egg or oil or whatever else, and then make up the difference with the water and the milk versus adding them in as all 3 separate measurements. But definitely cut back on your liquid because, as I've said a billion times, when you cook in an oven, it's a dry heat. So a lot of that liquid evaporates, but in a solar oven, it's like a greenhouse heat. So you retain all the moisture that you put into it. So that's why you want to cut back on liquid. So that's the first thing to think about. Second thing is you want your optimal bread making day is going to be the sunniest day possible with very little fluctuation in temperature and very little to no precipitation chances. And really the reason is because, if you've ever cooked a yeast bread or cake with yeast, your worst enemy is when you get really impatient and you want to check on it and you open the oven door and then your bread falls because the temperature fell. So yeast bread only works if you maintain a regular temperature. So another thing you can think about to do that is to use a cast iron skillet, like you see here. Is that cast iron, it takes a while to heat up, but once it's hot, it retains heat. So even if there was a huge cloud that went over the sun for like 5 minutes, your cast iron skillet is still going to be so hot that it will maintain the heat. So these are things to think about. The last thing to think about in making yeast bread, from everything that I've researched, everyone says that you need to add an egg to your recipe. So typically when I make bread, I make it in a bread machine and I don't add an egg, and that way it has, I don't know, I feel like it has a longer shelf life without that egg in it. But apparently you want to add an egg, especially if you're going to be cooking on a day with weather temperature fluctuations, because apparently eggs will help your bread not to fall in case the temperature suddenly falls. So that's just, I don't know. And plus eggs taste good. So this is a thing that I've started because in all my little research that I've been doing, everyone recommends especially before you start baking in your solar oven, that you go ahead and set your solar oven up and put it in the sunlight so that it can start warming up. So I went ahead and did that. Like you can see here on the edge of this picture that the sun was just creeping over my roof. This is my back porch. This is around 11 o'clock is when the sun starts hitting my back porch. But I didn't want to just waste the solar oven. So I went ahead and put 4 eggs in there because I'm still trying to perfect hard boiling an egg. And if you remember my first video, I cooked eggs for 2 hours and they were overdone. So this time I thought, well, I'll cook them for an hour and a half and see if that makes a difference. Now, I will say that I am setting them straight on top of a cast iron skillet, so they're probably going to cook faster than I anticipate because cast iron gets really, really hot. But anyways, I'm still working on that. One day I will perfect it. All right, in the meantime, while my eggs were cooking, I went ahead and got my ingredients together. So for some reason, I just had this idea one day. I was like, I wonder if you could make bread out of popcorn. And I looked up some recipes, and sure enough, you can. So the first thing you need to do is to pop the popcorn. and then stick it in a grinder of some sort. This is an extra coffee grinder that I have. I have another one for actual coffee, but this is an extra one that I bought that I can use for situations like this where I want to grind like seeds or herbs, or in this case, popcorn. So right now, let's switch to, I want to show you my actual recipe in case you want to do this. This is the recipe that I made. I modified from several different recipes online. So I used, and oh, just so you know, my baking pan my loaf pan, it holds 6 cups of water. So that's the size pan that I'm using. So I knew that I needed fewer than 6 cups of ingredients. So this is around 5 cups of ingredients because you know yeast bread is going to rise. So you're going to want to allow for the rise. All right, so I used 1.5 cups of popped ground popcorn, 2.5 cups of flour, 1/4 cup of sugar, 1/3 teaspoon of salt, 1 egg, 2 tablespoons of oil. Next time I want to try to use some of that pork fat. I think that'll make it taste really good. And then 2/3 cup of water, a 1/2 tablespoon of yeast. All right, so again, I ground it to a very fine powder. I set it on the espresso setting, or if your coffee grinder has a fine setting, you want to grind it as finely as you possibly can so that your bread will be as fluffy as possible. So I went ahead and did that. Here are my other ingredients, and obviously I just showed you my recipe, so this is not a surprise. All right, and I went ahead and used my bread machine to make the dough because, why work smarter, not harder? I could do it the old-fashioned way and knead it, and maybe one day I need, pun intended. One day I will actually make it the old-fashioned way, but not today. So my bread machine, I put it on the dough setting and it made the dough really nicely. All right, so after an hour and a half, I got my eggs, and this is what happened, okay? Because the cast iron skillet got so burning hot, this egg literally exploded on the cast iron skillet. So talk about an easy peel egg. This one just slid right out of the shell. Now, you may wonder why this ice water is brown, and that's because when I cook on my cast iron skillet, like if you remember my last video, I browned carnitas. I browned pork butt on my cast iron skillet before making carnitas in my solar oven. So that's why this water is brown, because what I do is I saute or I cook whatever in my cast iron skillet, and then while it's still hot, I scrape it with a plastic scraper and add oil and just let it sit. And then a few minutes later, when it's cooled off, I wipe it out. And I only ever add water if stuff is really stuck on there, but I never add soap. Like some people say, oh, wash it with soap and water. Never wash your cast iron skillet with soap. That is not a good idea, because you remove all of that really nice seasoning. And, the seasoning actually adds flavor into your next meal. So that's literally what happened to these eggs, and that's why they're brown. These eggs tasted like bacon, so I don't see that. I think that's kind of a neat little side effect. But anyways, they're really good, but I will show you a picture. They did get a little overdone, and you can see how easy these eggs were just laid, like, I don't know, maybe a week ago, but you can see how easy it was to peel them off, because the solar oven, what it does is, because it cooks the eggs more slowly, it dissolves that membrane between the shell and the egg, and so they become really easy to peel. Anyways, they have these brown spots because that's where the egg was actually laying straight on the cast iron skillet. And I will say that even though they only cooked for an hour and a half, they were still overdone. So I am still trying to perfect my hard-boiled egg. Next time, I'm only going to cook them for an hour. But They still tasted good, but yeah, they were overcooked. All right. All right. So I went ahead and greased my bread pan. I don't think that you need to do that, but I did it anyway because I just like buttering the pan. I just think it adds a little something. But the bread came right out of the pan. I don't think I needed butter. Anyways, once my dough was finished making in the bread machine, I put it into the pan. And then I just makeshifted this little pan situation. So most people who make bread in solar ovens, what they recommend is buying 2 bread pans and you stick one on top of the other. However, I don't want to buy another bread pan. I just have this one. Okay, one is enough. And I have this medium-sized cast iron skillet. So the advantage to this cast iron skillet is, number one, it's black, so it's going to retain the heat. Second of all, it allows for enough bread rise that, you know, if I were to just stick like a wok lid or something on top, that would be too flat. But this cast iron skillet is nicely dome shaped enough that it's going to allow for the bread to rise. And because the bread pan itself is clear, I can at least, even though I can't look in on it from the top, I can at least look in at the side and see how the bread is doing. All right, so this is what it looks like in the oven. And this cast iron skillet has been sitting in this oven at this point for like over 2 hours, so it's very nice and hot. And there you can see when that egg exploded, that's part of the shell. It literally exploded. I think I actually heard it. I was sitting in the living room. I think I heard it and I didn't know what that was, but yeah, my egg exploded. Anyways, this is what my bread pan and all that looks like. The bread pan itself is sandwiched in between that bigger skillet and then the medium-sized skillet on top of it. And this is an aerial view of what it looks like. And here is an example of what I'm telling you for an optimal bread making day. You can see that there's very little fluctuation in temperature. Even though there's some clouds, they're not a big deal. And you can see too that there's no precipitation scheduled for today. So that is like optimal bread making and baking weather. I don't think that it needs to be in the 80s. Like, the temperature outside is irrelevant. It's the fact that you don't want the temperature to fluctuate and you want a lot of sun and no precipitation, because it's not just the water of the precipitation, it's the fact that clouds cause the temperature to drop and clouds bring rain. So that's what you're looking at here. So this was a really good bread making day. All right, and here's just a picture of what the sky looked like. So there were actually just a few little clouds, but you can see how sunny and nice it is. Great bread making day. All right, so most solar oven recipes tell you that you should cook your bread or bake your bread for 2 hours on a sunny day. I checked it at about an hour and I could tell that it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. It was starting to come away from the side of the pan though. So I was like, I really don't think it's going to cook. I don't think it's going to take 2 hours to cook this. Well, sure enough, I checked it again at 1.5 hours and it was perfect. Like, nicely browned. Everything looked great and it smelled so good. So I went ahead and brought it in. So here's what the bread looks like. Perfect, totally perfect. And I put it on this little cake plate that my aunt-in-law gave me a few years ago. This is where we keep our homemade bread. I just keep it on the table. But I got impatient, so I cut it. And you can see there's steam coming off it, so it's like super hot. And you know, if you've made bread before, you're not supposed to cut it when it's still hot because the knife just tears through it instead of cutting. But you can see what a good texture it is, because even though I was cutting it while it was hot, it still sliced nicely. So the texture is really good in the middle. I have to say it's different from oven bread because, and again, it has to do with the fact that ovens are dry heat. and a solar oven is greenhouse moist heat. So the middle of the bread is a really nice, it has a really nice moisture to it. And owing to that fact, I may have to end up refrigerating this bread because, you know, mold grows with moisture, but we'll just have to see. But the outside of the bread is a really good texture too. It's nice and crunchy. So I'm really glad that I thought to check on it at an hour and a half versus waiting for 2 hours, because it probably would have been overdone at 2 hours. So an hour and a half was a great amount of time for this bread. And this is what it looks like from natural light. It looks really nice. And yeah, and the popcorn added such a really nice, like almost kind of a sweetness to it. But yeah, really good flavor. And so I really recommend this recipe and this method. I love cooking in a solar oven. Like, the sun is going to shine anyway. You might as well put it to work, right? It's free energy and it's really good. So I'm such a fan of solar oven cooking. And I'm a fan of this bread. So I hope that you become a fan of it too. You should try it out. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.